Welcome to the American Shoulder and Elbow Surgeons podcast. I am your host, Rachel Frank, a sports and shoulder surgeon at the University of Colorado in Denver. Before we get started, I should mention that the views expressed in this podcast do not necessarily reflect the views of the American Shoulder and Elbow Surgeons Society, the University of Utah, the University of Colorado, or the institution of our guest. We have a very special episode for you today, one of our most popular episodes, Giant in the Field. And our giant today is a surgeon who needs no introduction. I'm going to give you one anyway, but really he needs no introduction. Today's guest is superstar orthopedic surgeon and a true giant in our field, Dr. Gus Mazzocca. Dr. Mazzocca is the medical director for Mass General Brigham Sports Medicine and is chief division of sports medicine at Mass General Hospital, previously at UConn, and really has done a lot. He has hundreds and hundreds of publications, millions of dollars worth of grants. He's won more awards and has more titles and roles than we can really cover in the podcast, but we're going to try to get to a bunch of them. Dr. Mazzocca, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Rachel.
All right. Well, thank you. I think everyone on this podcast knows who you are, and I'm pretty sure understands the incredible contributions that you've made over the last several decades to sports medicine and shoulder and elbow surgery. We're going to get to all of that, but first, I'd like to ask you about some things that our listeners may not know, starting with your background. You've really done a little bit of everything. In fact, when I was doing some background work on this, I was surprised to learn a few things. Lacrosse college coach, working with NASA, and then ultimately becoming a physician and a surgeon scientist. Tell us a little bit about these roles that you've had that probably our listeners are going to be less familiar with. I'm particularly interested in collegiate Division I coaching, as well as your work with NASA.
So it goes back really to, I think, organic chemistry, which I received a C in at Denison University. And then the pre-med advisor at that time really thought that there was no chance of me getting into medical school, and had said the only chance I had was going to a foreign medical school. And I was so ill-informed at that time that I said, have you seen my French grade? Like, if I can't make it in English, why are you sending me to a foreign land? So I went and started getting my master's degree in physiology, exercise physiology at Springfield College. I had played lacrosse in college and was assistant coach at Springfield College in the fall, in the University of Hartford, which had a team, but they had gone from Division III to Division I. So when your basketball or your football team goes into Division I, then all the other sports have to go to Division I. So they had to have the lacrosse team go to Division I, but they really didn't have a budget for Division I. So I was by far the most, economical choice that they had at that time. But that's how I got the job at the University of Hartford, which
the value pick there.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So yeah, I did that for 3 years, and while I was there, so it was great.
Okay, I want to get back to that in a minute because I want to hear what you think from your experiences, the parallels on coaching Division I athletes and coaching your residents, your fellows, and your young faculty. But before that, tell us where NASA comes into play here.
So what happened was, as I was coach at the University of Hartford, I was still getting my master's degree. And my major advisor ended up taking a job down at NASA as they were developing kind of their long-term space flight and space station work. So they were worried about muscle atrophy and bone density. So my research in exercise physiology was on muscle atrophy. What really my interest was, when you would lift weights and work out and then you'd stop working out, why did you lose strength? And was it actually a loss of strength, a loss of endurance? And that actually boded, what really kind of mixed well with what the Johnson Space Center was looking at that time. So he went down there. I went down there as like on a visitor pass to help move him in and stuff. And then I just kept showing up to work. And then finally, because of the security risk, they had to hire me. So that's how I got my job at NASA.
Unbelievable. Do you still, so tell us, how long did you stay with NASA? And then how did that get you over to orthopedics?
So that really didn't get me over to orthopedics, but I think I was down at NASA, I want to say for 3 years, 4 years, 3 years. So I had coming out, I had tried to become, I applied to be an astronaut and, was rejected, obviously. And then I ended up living with a guy that became an astronaut. So that was pretty spectacular. His name's Dave Wolf. Which was, really exciting. And then we would support the landings, which was a lot of fun. So we would be either out at Edwards Air Force Base or we'd be down in Florida. And then we would do like muscle biopsies on the astronauts and look at muscle atrophy and muscle detraining. So from there, NASA wanted to have like kind of grow its own scientists instead of farming everything out. So they started a aerospace physiology PhD program at Wright State in Ohio, where they had a fellowship in flight medicine. So a lot of the flight doctors were trained out of Wright State. So they thought this would be good. So as I was there, working with a muscle physiologist, he was really starting to get really excited as they invented micelles, like lipid bilayers, where we could just put different, single proteins and study acid-base balance in that. And MRI was really kind of starting to come out. And I would be like, hey, why do we have to just do a lipid bilayer? Why don't we look at the whole muscle under an MRI? So he was really a great mentor, and he said, listen, this basic science is not for you. So that, and then my, Jennifer, my future wife, also really, thought that not being in research, but being in medicine would be, better. Encouraged me to try again, since I had been, kind of advised that it would never happen.
And then did you have any feeling at that point that should you go on to med school, be successful there, that it's going to be orthopedics, or was it something in medical school that inspired you at that point?
Yeah, I don't know really. I mean, I think it's hard. It's so long ago, Rachel, it's hard for me to really, to give you an honest answer. I remember, I was always interested in kind of, team-based stuff. I really always enjoyed that camaraderie. And then I think that, as you rotate around, you kind of see certain things are more fast-paced and certain things aren't. And then I think I kind of just gravitated to it. Anatomy, an anatomy class was probably a big item, but I forget. I don't think I was all gung-ho as everybody thinks I might have been. But you'd have to ask some of my medical school classmates. Maybe I was, and I just forget,
Well, knowing what I know about you, I think it's very clear that you were destined to do this because there's just no one better who does this at, every level, whether it's clinical care, education, research, team coverage. Those are the things I know of you the most. And I've never trained under you, but just getting to know you over, the decade or so that I've been involved in orthopedics, you have your footprint on everything. So I want to ask, when you think about all the things that you do, what how do you guide your residents, your fellows, and your young surgeons? What are your biggest words of wisdom for them? Because medicine now in 2023 is very different than it was even 5, 10 years ago, certainly different than 20, 30 years ago. There are certain principles that are the same, of course, taking care of the patient. That's always number one. But how we practice medicine, what we're going into, how we get paid, et cetera, all that's just changing and evolving by the day. So, how do you approach your young trainees and young surgeons on your faculty with words of wisdom? What do you tell them to be successful?
That's a good question. I think that I think it's different for a lot of different people, and I think that really you have to be thoughtful on what's important to you as an individual. And there's a lot of things that sometimes people respect and sometimes don't respect, but I think we have to respect what's important to all individuals. And, you have to definitely have passion for what you're interested in. I think that it's all of it is too hard to do if you're not passionate about it. Like it's not a good job if you're not passionate about it. And there's other avenues, right? Like you can punch out and you don't have to do surgical. You don't have to do, you know what I mean? Like, business. There's a lot of avenues for people to, punch out if they're not passionate about taking care of patients and operating. But also same is true for education and same is true for research. And I would say I have a great passion for education, like organizing it, trying to make it better. But I really don't think I'm a very good teacher in the OR. I think that's a big weakness of mine. And that bothers me and worries me. I try to work at it a little bit. I'm in a completely different role now where I am. So I don't have as much exposure to, either the residents, the fellows, or the medical students yet. I'm sure that's going to, that'll change. That's got to change from a granular level. But I think that's probably a biggest weakness of mine. You know what I mean? I think that I like research because of the camaraderie. Everybody thinks, you have to be really smart to do research. I don't think you have to be that smart to do research. You just have to be able to identify problems and then get a bunch of people that are all excited and communicate, and everybody can solve it together. That's what I like. That's a lot of fun for me. I think I've gotten too much credit for the stuff that we've done as a team. So there's a lot of different people that come up with all kinds of different ideas and thoughts, and you start putting that together. And then, but I think having a large team for that. But I think as far as words of wisdoms, Rachel, would be you have to have passion and then follow that passion. And there's all different avenues for that too.
Let me ask, because something you just said really hit home with me, and I think it's something that probably a lot of people feel and may not be willing to admit, but you've been, around this field and around all of us for a long time with your interest and passion for education, but you feeling like maybe you're not the best at education in the OR. What makes you say that? Because I've worked with a lot of people who've trained under you who absolutely have amazing things to say, but I feel that is one of the things that many of us want to be, especially young surgeons, we want to be so good at. We want to be known as the best doc to work with in the OR, the residents. We want the residents, fellow students to love us. And we really think of ourselves either in a good a good way or a bad way based on that, when that may not necessarily be healthy. What makes you say that? Is it you're handsy and you like to do the case, or tell us? Because I feel similarly, and I'm in a different point in my career than you, but I'm curious because I want to learn from your wisdom here.
We may have to edit this part out.
No problem. Let me make a note here at 7:18. We may have to edit this out. Okay.
No, I think that I think there are surgeons. I think there are great surgeons that can get anybody out of any problem. One of those that we both trained under is Dr. Romeo. That guy can let you go and you could make a huge mess, and he could come in within 7 to 12 minutes and fix a lot of things pretty quickly. And I think those are, and there's, I'm sure there's way many more, I would say, kind of Bob Arciero is another mentor of mine, is very similar to that. Like just really understanding what's going on, 3-dimensional ability, where I don't, you know what I mean? Like I don't have that natural ability. There's a lot of things that I really have to practice a lot at to get good at, and I worry about things not being as good as they can be because of me. So I think that I don't have the ability, like I almost feel confidence-wise that I barely have the ability to do it as perfectly as I can. And then if there's any kind of off, that's going to be hard for me to make up for that. So that's where I worry about. So yeah, I would say that I am probably handsy, and then, but I will say this, that I've had fellows that were probably better than I was surgically, where I felt confident. Like if someone can do it better or has, I would say one area that I really struggle with that a lot of people know is the humeral cut on a total shoulder. Like I ask a lot of surgeons what they do, how they do it, what their tricks are. And they always kind of, look at me a little quizzically because it's not that big a deal for most people. But I always worry about, what that angle is, what the version is, which the inclination is. And some people are really good at cutting it and some are not. So that's something that I saw the difference in a lot of different residents or fellows based on that. So I would always kind of drill pins because I wanted to see the version, but it was also a nice safety. Like you couldn't really mess it up if you had the pins there. So, but that's kind of, I think there's a lot of it is my confidence, which I try to work on. I know that's an issue. I think my confidence and my ability probably impairs my ability to be a better surgical teacher, but I really like the educational aspect of it. Like I really like that whole thing. I really, being a coach, I always think of the residents as, as a team, right? You recruit them, then they come in, they play for 5 years, and then they go to the pros. Like that's how I thought of it, right? So it was a 5-year cycle, where they would come in, we would recruit them, right? Just like you do. And then they would come and you'd have your team, and then they would go to the pros. And then you'd see them in the pros, right? Like that'd be fun to see. So I'd say at the place I'm now is a lot different because it's so big. And I don't have a lot to do with them right now at all. So I really probably miss that a lot. I miss the camaraderie of all the residents and the fellows.
It's amazing to hear you speak so openly and honestly about this at your stage in your career, because I can just tell you so many people who have worked under you and trained under you just think you're phenomenal. So if that is any help from not just from the clinical research, all that perspective, from the surgical perspective. So just so you know that's the word on the street.
I think the word on the street is that's a little polite. You know what I mean?
I'm just telling you what I hear. Let's talk a little bit because I could pick your brain on this all day, but we only have a limited amount of time. So you've done research in so many areas, and it's too much for this podcast to list them all. But the three areas that have really inspired at least my career, and I would like to thank many of the shoulder and elbow listeners here. Your work on distal biceps. I just did one on Friday, and I used your technique, and I said out loud to my fellow, I go, this is what Dr. Romeo taught me to do, and this is based on work that Dr. Romeo and Dr. Mazzocca did, so inspiring to me clinically. But the two other areas are rotator cuff repair and then biologics with rotator cuff repair. So let me ask you, because you have an amazing ability to think of techniques in real time, such as using bursal cells potentially mixed with a blood-based biologic like PRP, and then implementing that in real time, time equals zero, before we necessarily have clinical data to support the use. But you're studying this concurrently. You're studying the clinical outcomes. You're studying the basic science. Where do you think the future of this is? I mean, it's impossible to say for sure, but where are we going with rotator cuff repair and biologics? And what are your strategies for keeping up with the research in real time when industry is pushing us to use the products faster than the papers come out?
I do think that, the rotator cuff repair, it's not, we used to brag about it to our patients, that we were doing all this research in it. It was a big thing, like, oh, we researched this a lot. But now I joke that it's, I've been doing research on it to try to get the tendon to heal a bone for 22 years. So now it's becoming pathetic because we really haven't changed much. I do think that the economic benefit of returning people to work even a month or 6 weeks earlier than 6 months. So if we could somehow decrease the recovery time to 5 months or to 4 months after a rotator cuff repair, where we could send people back to work, that would be huge. And that's kind of, when I first got into this, Russ Warren, I was looking at revision rotator cuffs. That was my thing, because I was like, listen, if you can change the revision, the failure rate on revisions is huge compared to primaries. And Dr. Warren was like, listen, don't mess with the revisions because there's a lot of other things going on. You know what I mean? It's not just all biologics. There's biomechanical issues. It's really multifactorial. And he's told me then, concentrate on eliminating the failures in the primaries. Now, you'd be surprised, but I really didn't listen to him until about 5 or 6 years after that, when we slowly came around, and that's kind of what we're doing. So the bursa story is actually a really interesting story, because the problem with bone tendon healing, or that enthesis, is it ends up being really difficult to study, because the knockout mice that you would make to try to study certain genetic pathways and how it would, the embryology of it, really is not compatible with life. So it really is hard to make specific mice or knockout mice to study the embryology of that bone tendon, or even bone tendon healing. Now, there are some scientists that do it, but it's not got a lot of great funding. But we had a guy, Nat Diamond, who was at UConn doing his postdoc before he went to Penn with Dr. Soslowski. And he was saying that, hey, in a lot of their work, they had found, and they were able to trace cells that were leading to healing of the tendon that were coming from the peritoneum. So I said, well, that's really interesting, right? It wasn't coming from the bone like some people think, and it wasn't coming from the tendon like some people think. It was coming from the peritoneum. So then I said, wow, well, like, where's the peritoneum of the supraspinatus? So we started looking at the peritoneum and supraspinatus, which it really doesn't have a big peritoneum like the patella tendon, or you know what I mean, or the Achilles. So we said, oh, it must be the bursa. So we started looking at the bursa cells. We started looking at their proliferative ability. We looked at if they could differentiate. Daichi Morikawa, who was one of our research fellows, did a lot of that early work. And just like I said, like you have a huge team that all had different ideas on how to look at this. And it was really surprising that, there were a lot of those pluripotential cells that were in the bursa and that were highly active. So that became exciting. And then we're like, wow, that's a pretty kind of cost-effective, easy way, especially with all the talk of the FDA and transplanting tissues from different areas of the body and the concern about, what's going to be approved biologically and what's not going to be approved biologically. So that kind of made a lot of sense. So that's why we've been going on. I think it's kind of a really kind of fast, easy, makes sense. You have to get rid of some of it to see it. There's a lot of surgeons that have left the bursa that have known this. This is not new. This is not new in any way, shape, or form. So there are a lot of people that don't take a complete bursectomy, leave a lot of that bursa or keep the bursa there because they realize that it did have some healing ability. But anyway, that's the bursa story.
So do you think, looking 5, 10, 20 years into the future for cuff, do you think for primary cuffs, maybe in higher risk patients, but primary cuffs, where we know healing is challenged, be it due to they smoke or they have medical problems that potentially prohibit good healing, or they just have a bad cuff, or it's just bad luck, whatever the factors might be, do you think that the future is putting some sort of autologous biologic substance, be it bursal cells or other, into that cuff? Is it better anchors? Is it some sort of biologic suture material within the anchors or to supplement the anchors? Is it a patch? Is it what is it that's going to become the standard of care? Because certainly what we're doing now cannot remain the standard of care with failure rates, that are just still unacceptable. And every company, every lab is trying to push the envelope with improving cuff repair. What do you think is the future in the next 20 years for the standard of care for a primary cuff? And I'm not talking about, the small to medium traumatic cuff tear in a 40 to 50-year-old. Those I think we know are going to heal no matter what you do, hopefully. But kind of the more acute on chronic or chronic cuff tears that you want to fix, you don't want to do a reverse, you don't want to do an SCR or something like that.
Yeah, I don't know. I think mechanically, we've done a lot of biomechanical work, and I think mechanically that's not the problem.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Like when you go in and operate on failed rotator cuff repairs, I find more times than not that the anchor's in place, the suture loop's in place, the knot's in place, and the tendon is, medial to the glenoid.
Yeah.
So I don't really, maybe I'm wrong, but I don't think mechanically we need, and listen, absolutely, industry will keep improving, keep making improvements, which will be great, right? Like that's what their job is. Right. Like, sure. How many kind of different types of cars do we need? How many more chicken sandwiches do we need? Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, yeah, that's what we are, right? Like we're about improving, making things better and giving people more options. So I don't think that's bad. I think that, kind of partnering with industry is actually a good thing. I know academics really kind of doesn't like it so much, and I know there's huge conflicts. But I think if the conflicts are transparent, that industry is a really good partner to work with. I had the good fortune to work with Arthrex for a long time, and I think that they provided us resources that we couldn't have gotten from any other place. I think they also companies are really interested in education, and they can provide a lot of resources. So I think, working with companies and listen, knowing that there's conflicts there and making sure those conflicts are transparent. But I think when the conflicts are transparent, then it's okay. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I don't know. That's where I stand on it. Like, if you know what the conflicts are, and that those people that are reviewing your papers, or they know the conflicts, and there you can be critical. That's the beauty of the peer review, right? The peer review. That's why we're always so desperate to publish our work, because we knew we were on the take. We knew we were on the, not the edge, we were over the edge, right? Like, we were really all in on industry support, and we had to be able to publish our work. Otherwise we would be, really kind of not so impactful. So that was a big motivation for us. That became a big motivation to make sure that we would do kind of really straightforward and honest, and we'd be thought of as very transparent people that, represented ourselves in a way that everybody knew we were getting this industry funding, but that we were doing work that would be honest and portrayed honestly. So I think that's it. Your question was, what's going to happen to rotator cuff repairs in 20 years? I would say that I don't know. I know I know the senescent world is interesting. We're kind of petering around with that. We had one of our, medical students who, really took charge of that and really brought us into the senescent world. So I think that's an interesting avenue to go about, kind of the planned apoptosis or that type of thing. But I also think that, the next generation coming up will have different ideas. But I do think something's got to change. And I don't think it's mechanic. I don't know. And the problem is that, like I said, it's hard to know how that enthesis heals or forms. That's the problem, right? It's hard to study the basics of it since we don't know. So all we do is throw a lot of fertilizer on it. And sometimes the fertilizer works because it hits the right time. And sometimes the fertilizer doesn't work.
All right. Tell us, you're an innovator within all of orthopedics, in particular the upper extremity. You've had a lot of things go well. Has there ever been a time from a research perspective where you've thought of technique A or theory B or whatever it might be, and it was a bust? Tell us, have you ever had a moment like that, and how'd you deal with it?
Those are all the time. That's all the time. That's not like I can't, you know what? Like, I had asked you, hey, is there anything I should prepare for? I could have gone for that, like, because I could have thought of something, but it happens so much that I can't think of it. It's like it happens all the time, right? There's stuff that you try that doesn't work. And that's kind of, I know in the research world, there are many scientists that are truly scientists where they will think out their experiment and think about all the problems that can happen and troubleshoot for those. That's not me. I'm kind of an action guy. We just start throwing things at it and watch stuff fail. And then okay, that doesn't work. Try this. Okay, that doesn't work. Try this. That's kind of what I enjoy, to be honest with you. Like I don't enjoy sitting by myself and thinking. I really don't enjoy that. I rather just be with a group of people trying to troubleshoot things and figure stuff out. So has there ever been a time when something's gone wrong? Yeah, constantly. Things go wrong constantly. Daily basis, they're going wrong. How do I deal with it? Just keep moving on. You know what I mean? We just keep, I have little sayings, just get some points on the board. We just need to get some points on the board. Let's just get a field goal here. You know what I mean? We'll regroup. So
I love it. I've been a Ted Lasso fan, and one of his sayings is "Be a goldfish. Just forget about it and move on."
Sure.
And I love that. That's so. So you heard it here a lot for all the listeners. A lot of things sometimes don't work out well, but if you want a career like Dr. Mazzocca, keep pushing, get some points on the board, as he says. I want to ask you one more kind of researchy education question, and then I want to get a little bit into you, and then we're getting short on time, and I could stay here all night picking your brain, but I want to be respectful of your time. You work with a lot of societies. This podcast is for ASES, but like many of our ASES members, there's some overlap with what we do with ANA, with AOSSM, with ISACOS, et cetera, with the Academy. How do you manage being involved in all the societies, managing your time with that? Because you're involved in all the societies, and I'm sure you get asked. I remember I asked you to be part of our ANA research committee, and not only did you do that, but you were our most active member, despite being our most experienced surgeon, which usually doesn't go hand in hand. Usually the guys at the top, guys and gals at the top, don't do as much work, and you were always the first to review the abstracts, the papers, give comments. It was such a way to lead by example, so thank you for that. But I imagine you do that with everything you commit to, and you're involved in a bunch of societies. So how do you manage that? And for our younger listeners who may want to get into leadership in one society versus another, how would you advise them to go about that?
I would say that I have always liked, and the societies that I'm a part of have actually grown since I've been a part of them, right? So, and I mean no disrespect, but I was never a big fan of the Academy meeting because it was so big and that it was so spread out, and you couldn't really, like, you were kind of in your group with your group. There was no translatability, or you weren't like mixing with kind of your idols. You weren't running into any of your idols at the Academy meeting. Like they were doing their own thing. But at the smaller meetings, like the AOSSM or ANA or the ASES, they were smaller meetings where you would, you'd run into those people. You'd be able to talk to them. They would talk to you. They'd ask you questions. So I think that's what I like. I like the smaller meetings. I would say I'm known for not being at the whole meeting, right? Like I never go to the whole meeting. I like to try to go in, see a bunch of stuff, hopefully lucky enough to present, and then I try to get out. I really try, and probably an important thing for people with young families is it's the nights away. That's all that matters. So when you're looking at going to meetings, flying out at say 5 a.m. is way better than flying out in 5 p.m. And a lot of times, there's a lot of things that can be organized around that. So I would say that for those surgeons with young families, really look at your nights away. That's where the devastation comes. That's where you miss out on a lot of things. And I think that's really important. So I would always try to be home by Saturday morning. So, you could take a red eye back from California or the West Coast, so you'd be able to be at a meeting in the West Coast till Friday afternoon. You'd be able to, go to a late night, or not a late night, but like an afternoon or a late, evening session, even dinner, and then go get the red eye. And then you're home by 6, as everybody's waking up on Saturday morning. So I think that's really important. I think being around your family is important, and you don't have to go to the whole meeting to take advantage of it.
All right. Words of wisdom. Let me ask you, who is your biggest mentor or mentors?
Well, I have definitely a lot of those mentors. I think, I'd have to say probably Bruce Browner, who, was able to in med school, get me into orthopedic residency. And then he was, hired me at UConn. So I think that was the first one. Tony Romeo, Bernie Bach, Chuck Bush Joseph, Brian Cole, like the whole Rush crew. That was really transformative for me in my career, coming from UConn and then going to Rush. For a lot of the listeners, Rush wasn't always as great as it is right now. It was actually kind of a mid-major crappy fellowship when they let me in, and then it got good. No, Dr. Bach knows. He knows. Wasn't as great as it. He grew it. But it was kind of a mid-major when they let me in, and then of course it's huge and blossomed since that time. So I've gotten a lot of credit for that, but that wasn't it. But I think that crew was very transformative. I think Bob Arciero, who was really a mentor for my whole time at UConn, and then my family, my parents, my wife, the children, all types of people. You always worry when you ask that question. Like the minute you stop talking, you start thinking about the 25 other mentors that really helped you that you didn't mention. So,
there's no way you can list them all. I mean, but those are some great people that you mentioned. Tell us a Tony Romeo story. Now, the one I'm thinking of is the one I've heard you tell a few of us before about your interview day. But you could tell that story, or just tell us a Tony Romeo story, because we've had Dr. Romeo on. He's like Bernie Bach, he's a mentor for me, and Pete Chalmers and so many of the listeners here. Tell us your favorite Tony Romeo story.
All right. Well, the favorite Tony Romeo story is it was the first year they had 3 fellows at Rush. So we all tried to decide, and I was I don't think I got the choice, but I started with Romeo. I think I wanted him last because I was interested in shoulder, but I got him first. And, that was a big deal. So, for those of you, Dr. Romeo does his thing. He's running 2 rooms. You're going back and forth. And, I was, having trouble getting into the shoulder. I was trying to learn how to tie knots. There was a lot of skills that I wanted to learn, and I would ask him those questions. And he would hesitate. He didn't have great answers to all those basic questions. So he tells the story differently than I do. But I was asking him questions, and then, he wasn't really answering. So I took a video. I got his video camera, and I videotaped him, getting into the shoulder with the trocar. I videotaped him tying knots. I videotaped him, how he uses his hands to pass, suture through tissue for rotator cuffs or labral. So I videotaped it all, and then I would slow it down and watch it and find out what he was doing. That's how we came up with the Romeo 3-finger shuck. That's how we came up with a lot of those terms. Videotaping Romeo do his thing. That's he tells it differently. He says that I tore my scrubs off and stormed out of the OR and then took videos. But the day, the truth is somewhere in the middle, I think.
I see. Now, can you tell us about your interview day with Dr. Romeo for fellowship?
The interview day that's not an accurate story. I think that's been blown out. But I will tell you this. We went to he knew when we were starting to do some of that work on the distal biceps, we wanted to go. And he was the one that knew about the Heyman Todd osteologic collection in Cleveland. So he had us go, this guy, Eric Berkson, who's now my partner here, who was a resident at Rush in those days. He, paid for us to go talk to the guy. We were going to go measure all of these proximal radius radial tuberosities. Well, it was September 11th, 2001. That's the day, that's the morning that we flew from Chicago to Cleveland. So we land in Chicago, and one of the towers is on fire. We don't think much of it. We get to the the Cleveland Museum of Natural History. We go downstairs. We remind you, you only had like 8 hours with special permission. 8 hours, that's all we had. So we had all our calipers with us. And I was like, we have to measure as many as we could. Anyway, the rest is history, but we get stuck there. Dr. Romeo's stuck in Nice, France. We were able to get back. We kind of run his practice while he's stuck in France trying to get back. But that was all around the distal biceps and how we were designing that 8x12 peak interference screw at that time based on those measurements.
What an amazing story. Brings back, I'm sure, a lot of memories for everyone listening. Can probably remember where they were on that day doing, whatever they were doing. And that's what you were doing that day, which is just incredible. We're getting toward the end of our time. I just have a couple more questions for you. You've been in a leadership position for a long time at UConn and now in the big boss position in Boston. When you're looking to make a hire of a new faculty or of an experienced faculty looking to join the staff, what are the qualities, maybe one or two, that you look for as yep, that guy, that gal has it. That's what I want in my faculty. And what's maybe one or two red flags when you see this either in your interview or you hear about it from someone else where maybe that candidate is the best thing since sliced bread on paper, but something rubs you the wrong way? And you've done this for a long time now. So I think there's probably things that right away, not going to work, not going to fly here. What are those couple good qualities and maybe one bad quality from your position as someone in a leadership role?
Well, I listen, I've, made a lot of mistakes. So let's get that out on the table, right? There's been a lot of mistakes. But I would say that probably the kind of qualities that I gravitate to are honesty, enthusiasm, passion, grit. Those are kind of the things that I like. I think that experience, I think intellect, I think are secondary to me as opposed to those. I think that, really a motivated, hardworking person with a lot of passion and excitement, positive attitude, someone that you like being around, that can get a lot more done than others. So I think those are big things. I think probably red flags would be evidence of selfishness. I think that kind of negative or worrying about the other person, why are they getting that and I'm not getting this, that kind of stuff. And then, of course, any type of dishonesty, even a sniff of it, right? Like, and I don't think there's much of that. I think that's one of the great things about our business is, every month you're bearing your soul and, you publicly talk about your mistakes and you learn from them. So I think that's what makes us great. But I think those would be, that's a red flag. Those would be obvious red flags. I would love to say that, you can, I think human resources is probably the hardest part of all of this. When you're talking about, hiring faculty, you're talking about medical students, you're talking about residents, you're talking about fellows. I think picking the human resources aspect of that, seeing talent where other people don't see it, I think those are all kind of, great qualities that I wish I had and I don't. So, figuring out who's going to be successful and who's not is really hard.
It's tough. Let me ask you our last question. When we ask all of our giants in the field this, and there's no wrong answers, if you could pick anyone, anywhere, dead or alive, to go have dinner with, who would it be and where would you go? I'd love for you to say right now, Tony Romeo and Mark Cohen, like somewhere with the two of them, with you sitting right in the middle, and anyone who's trained at Rush will understand. But tell us, who would it be, and where would you go?
Geez, that's actually stumping me right now. I can't. I don't have a. I know that's a classic interview question, and I would have to say that I don't know. I think that I think probably for me, having my whole family around is probably the greatest thrill. Like there's, Christmas, Thanksgiving, Easter, where our whole family and our whole extended family gets together. I think those are the most special times for me. I know that's not really a clever answer or intellectually stimulating, but I really think that for me, it's those times when we're all together as a big group, like, we're talking 15 to 20 people, everybody talking and yelling, and it's loud. That's the best for me. That's what I
Would
love
it
the most.
be at home, or would you guys go to? What's your favorite restaurant?
Oh no, yeah, it's always at home. No, no,
All right.
no. We're home. We're home people.
And
We're
who's
home.
cooking?
Everybody's cooking. That's the best part of it.
All right.
Everybody's got their own thing. Everybody's doing their own thing. Everybody's messing with everybody else's dish. So that's part of the fun.
Sounds great. I'm gonna have to join next time. I'm gonna invite myself as
Yeah,
a
you can't
honorary
make it.
member.
We're having a thing at Isocos, right? You're flying
I
home.
know. I wish I could make it. Well, I would love to keep you here for another hour, but I want to be respectful of your time. Thank you so much for joining us today on the podcast. I think our listeners are going to absolutely love this. So thank you very much for taking the time.
Yeah, thank you, Rachel. It was great. Great talk with you. Great questions. It's really interesting. It's great seeing how successful you've become.
I've got great mentors, so I'm just trying to put one foot in front of the other. But again, thank you so much. That is all the time we have for today's podcast. We want to thank our guest, giant of the field, Dr. Mazzocca. For all of our shoulder and elbow listeners out there, please don't forget to subscribe. And for my co-host, Pete Chalmers, who couldn't make it today, I'm Rachel Frank, and we'll see you next time.